To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Turn the page and we'll go to 75, to the second full verse there, and we'll go from that verse to the middle of page 76. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms in all aspects. With supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha, a star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Then go forward, just going to do two more prayers on page 97 or 98, depending on which version of the prayer book you have. It's either at the bottom of 97 or the top of 98. The prayer that's called the Short Mandala Offering. This is where we are visualizing the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful paradise, just kind of a complete pure world. And we're offering that to receive the teachings from the holy beings, get their blessings, or what have you. They're kind of trying to create that vast offering so that we have a store of merit from which to draw from in regard to our own practice of these teachings. So we're going to recite just that verse in English and then skip the request to turn the wheel of Dharma and go to the offering mantra that's on page 98, Idam Guru and so on. And then we'll go to Refuge and Bodhicitta, the final prayer before we start, which we'll do once in English, twice in the Tibetan. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Choknama Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyangi Pe Sonamgi Jola Panchir Sangye Drupar Shok Sangye Chodang Soki Choknama Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsuchi. Daki chunyangi pesonamgi. Drola penshir sangye druparsho. Okay, you can set the prayer books aside. And let's begin today with a short meditation. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit, to let go of whatever distractions we might have as best as we can. Then with our minds a bit calmer, we'll set a good intention for being here today before we begin the actual teaching. So just find a good meditation posture, one that's comfortable for yourself, and yet making sure there is some uprightness to the body, the back somewhat straight, the head upright, and then relaxing into this posture, letting go of any tension as best as you can, especially in the neck and shoulder area. No doubt other areas where you might hold some stress, some tension in the body. Just try to soften into those areas. And then breathing naturally, begin to pay attention to the breath. And if you have a technique that you already use to work with the breath in meditation, you can do that. And if not, then usually I suggest working with this sensation that occurs in the nostrils, inside the tip of the nose or on the upper lip, where we feel the air coming in and out as we breathe in and out through the nose. Once you tune into that sensation, it will become a bit more prominent, and you make that your meditation object, trying to stay present with that sensation through the inhalation, through the exhalation. But no doubt the mind will wander as it's prone to do, and suddenly we'll be thinking about things that we're planning for this week, or it's something that happened in the recent past that's on our minds, or perhaps some preoccupation or worry. We might even get distracted by sounds, other sensations. But whatever it is that has pulled you away from the breath, when you see that that's happened, there's no need for any judgment. You simply let go of that distraction, make a conscious choice to return to the breath. And then again, be vigilant. And when the mind wanders again, then pull the mind back to the breath. So we're just going to do this in silence for a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set your motivation for today. So as you continue to attend to the breath, you might add an additional thought, which is just a real gratefulness that you still have this human life, continuing to be able to use this life well. As Rinpoche often advises us, we should wake up every morning and be so grateful that we have not died that night, that we still have this human body, this human existence, so rich with opportunity. And our breathing is a symbol of that, continuing to breathe in, breathe out, to be alive, to have this existence. Have great gratitude for this. But it's simply not enough to have this human existence, but rather to use this life meaningfully is what's most important. And this is what we're studying in this short text that Rinpoche is advising us to work with. So as we'll be going into in more detail today, we want to use our lives to serve others, to cherish others, to be of benefit to others. This is the best use of this human life. This starts with the simple actions of refraining from harming others, and then eventually trying to do what we can to benefit them, and eventually achieving the greatest benefit for them and from them by becoming enlightened. When we last met, we went through that one verse, and I'll read it today, recite it today, and we can meditate on it briefly. But it encapsulates this idea that we are absolutely set upon getting the best possible, using it as a platform to be this mind that cherishes others greatly and wants to become enlightened for their sake. So the verse that we went through last time is, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them most dear at all times. So think about the incredible preciousness of others. It's through others that we are able to practice morality, generate good karma. It's through others that we're able to develop all of our qualities of compassion, loving kindness, and patience, engage in acts of generosity, and so on. And it's eventually through others that we achieve our greatest possible state of mind, the mind of complete Buddhahood, the greatest welfare for oneself, and then you are in the best position to help others to achieve their welfare as well. So generate those sorts of thoughts for your motivation today, really wanting to be of greatest benefit to all beings and seeing that they are the source of all of our happiness. Therefore, we have to hold them dear. We have to make them the object of all of our actions through this mind of bodhicitta that strives to achieve their greatest welfare through our having attained enlightenment ourselves. So before I go too far, is the sound okay for everyone? Is everyone able to hear me okay? It's all fine? Okay. And also those on online. By the way, I just might mention to people that if you do happen to have time when you're away or you can't come into the center because you're sick or something, we do have live streaming of the teachings now on both Wednesday and Sunday. So be sure to talk to Mary or send an email to info@tnlsf.org, and they'll send you the link and make sure that you can connect at home if you do need to, if you're traveling or can't come in. So just wanted to remind people about that. So we are working with this wonderful text. You all have a copy of it on your table there. Hopefully everyone's got one. It's called The Method to Transform a Suffering Life into Happiness, Including Enlightenment. We've been working with this for the last couple months since I returned from my travels and when Geshe Sherab left. and been kind of going through this. This is a text that once more Lama Zopa Rinpoche has compiled a number of practices that he's really encouraging us to start our day with, to let this be kind of setting the tone for our day, setting our intention for the day, and also engaging in a few practices that help us to make everything we do most powerful. So we've gone through the first part of this, which if we go to page 7 of the booklet that you have there, the little photocopied booklet. And by the way, you're welcome to keep this if you'd like to take it with you. Well, we put them out on the tables for everyone to make sure everyone has a copy, but if you'd like to take it home and work with it, that's the whole intention behind me doing this, and why Rinpoche has given us this practice is so that you can use it at home. So by all means, you're welcome to take that copy with you. On page 7, we began with this direct meditation on the graduated path, which once more, I don't think I'm going to go through in as much detail now because we've gone through it quite a bit extensively in the last few months, but we're going to go ahead and read it at least. And this encapsulates the 3 levels of the stages of the path, beginning with the preliminary meditation on looking at the relationship that we have with our gurus, with our teachers, and how important it is that we make that a very meaningful relationship and we follow their advice as best as we can. That's kind of the first few verses that go to the top of page 8. And then in the middle of page 8 is the first level of the graduated path, which is all about kind of acknowledging that this life is going to come to an end, that we need to have some concern for our future existence. Therefore, we need to engage in being very attentive to our actions, creating the karma so that we can have a good existence after this life ends. The next verse, which is at the bottom of page 8, is the next level of the stages of the path. Stages of the path, once more, are a very detailed way of taking all the Buddha's teachings and encapsulating them into 3 levels of practice. So this second level of practice is what I'm going to go into in more detail on the Saturday class. It starts next Saturday, kind of samsara, nirvana, the big picture. How do we work with this in our lives? How do we overcome the causes of our continuing to go from life to life, which are essentially our own delusions and of course the karma that we create on the basis of that. So we'll look at that verse, read that through. Then we go up to the top of page 9, and this is the more common way that the third level of the stages of the path is presented, which is really what we're going to be focusing on primarily today. All the verses that Rinpoche has added after this are an extension of that bodhicitta motivation, where we don't just look at our own situation, our own future existence, or our own continuing to go from life to life in the wheel of existence, but rather to look at the big picture for everyone, that we're all in this together. And for us to separate our own welfare from the welfare of others doesn't make sense because we are intimately involved with others. They've been very kind to us and been in very crucial roles for us when we were in very vulnerable places during different lives. Even this life, we can see certainly at the beginning of this life how vulnerable we were and how much our parents protected us. So we want to see all beings through that same lens, that they've all been incredibly kind to us, and therefore we need to dedicate ourselves to their welfare. Then we get to the last verse of this little Lamrim prayer, Stages of the Path prayer. And this is where we look at the Vajrayana teachings. And I didn't go into those in great detail. This is what are called the Tantric teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, which you do have to receive initiation into in order to practice fully. But the idea is if you have this unbearable compassion that really wants to become enlightened as quickly as possible for others, then the Tantric path is what you need. You need to become enlightened even more quickly so that you can benefit others much more quickly as well. And then at the top of page 10, we have a little recap verse, which is about the guru and really once more reconnecting with our dedication to our teachers. And then we'll end right there. So the middle of page 10. So let's go ahead and just recite these together today. I think it's just a nice way to review what we've done. Essence encompassing all the Buddhas, originator of all the holy dharma of scripture and realization, principle of all the Aryas intending virtue. In the glorious holy gurus, I take refuge. Please, gurus, bless my mind to become dharma, dharma to become the path, and the path to be without obstacles. Until I achieve Buddhahood, please bless me to be like youthful Norsang and Bodhisattva always crying, in correctly following the virtuous friend with pure thought and action, seeing whatever is done is pure, and accomplishing whatever is said and advised. Please bless me to see that this greatly meaningful body with freedoms and richnesses is difficult to find and easily perishes, that action and results are so profound and that the sufferings of the evil-gone transmigratory beings are so difficult to bear. Therefore, please bless me to take refuge from the depths of my heart in the three rare sublime ones, to abandon negative karma, and to accomplish virtue according to Dharma. In dependence upon that, even if I achieve the mere higher rebirth of a deva or human, I will still have to experience suffering endlessly in samsara because of not having abandoned and being under the control of the disturbing thought obscurations. Therefore, please bless me to reflect well upon the way of circling in samsara and to continuously follow day and night the path of the three types of precious trainings, the principal method for becoming free from samsara. In dependence upon that, even if I achieve mere liberation, since there is no sentient being of the six types who has not been my father and mother, please bless me to think I must fulfill their purpose and turn away from the lower happiness of nirvana. Then please bless me to generate precious bodhicitta by equalizing and exchanging myself with others, and to follow the conduct of the conqueror's sons, the six paramitas, and so forth. Having trained my mind in the common path in that way, I will not be upset even if I have to experience the sufferings of samsara for a long time. However, please bless me to look at sentient beings with extraordinary, unbearable compassion, and to enter the quick path of the Vajrayana Teachings. Then please bless me to protect my vows and samayas more than my life, and to quickly accomplish the unified Vajradhara state in one brief lifetime of this degenerate time. May I not give rise to heresy for even a second in regard to the actions of the glorious Guru. May I see whatever actions are done as pure. With this devotion, may I receive the Guru's blessings in my heart. Magnificent and precious root Guru, please abide on the lotus seat at my heart. Guide me with your great kindness and grant me the realizations of your holy body, speech, and mind. So the verses that follow here, the next two that we're going to be talking about today, the second one, I went through the first one last time, and this is what I recited in the meditation today that we were kind of working with. And as well as the verses that follow that are from Shantideva, are all about expanding on this bodhicitta motivation. Of course, this being really the primary purpose of this practice. Rinpoche really wants us to start every day with that strong motivation to make all of our actions together with that thought, that everything that we do is about trying to become enlightened for the sake of others. We'll even talk at one point about how Rinpoche gives us advice about making even the most menial, most mundane actions that we do into very powerful thoughts, powerful practices because of what we're doing with our minds. In Buddhism, once more, everything's about what we're doing with our minds. Obviously, that plays out in terms of our physical actions, our verbal actions, because we want those to follow suit. But if we aren't tending to our minds, then our physical and verbal actions are going to be a mess anyway, because we're not going to be really thinking about what the proper thing is to do. So if we infuse our minds with bodhicitta, with cherishing others, with making sure that they are the main objective, they are what we are trying to always accomplish, is their welfare, their well-being, be focused on them. This is a wonderful way to live our lives, the most meaningful way to live our lives. So that very first verse that I did recite, this was from the 8 verses of thought transformation, and it is verse 1 of those 8 verses. Let's go ahead and recite that and just refresh our memories on that. Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings, who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I shall hold them most dear at all times. So as I said in the meditation, this is where we're looking at others and we're saying that they are wish-fulfilling for us. His Holiness the Dalai Lama often talks about this idea of being wisely selfish. Without a doubt, our welfare is involved in the picture. It doesn't go away completely. But the way that we've been going about attending to our own welfare has been unwisely selfish. We go about it thinking that if I watch out for number one, if I take care of myself, if I always make sure I get what I want, then somehow I'm going to be happy. but it's an illusion because we are not able to actually achieve true lasting happiness that way. You might be able to get what you want in the moment, but you're probably going to create a lot of negative karma along the way. You're going to step on a lot of toes. You're going to make a lot of other people upset and angry in the process of getting what you want. If you are attentive to what others want, I mean, I'm not talking about unrealistic wants and, ridiculous things that people want that are not really good for them, but rather if we are really focused on their welfare at a somewhat temporal level, but mostly at an ultimate level, that we're really trying to make sure that all beings get to a state of complete peace and happiness that we ourselves are striving to attain, then we're guaranteed our happiness. Rinpoche points out that if we have this mind that is set on achieving enlightenment for the sake of others, we'll eventually gain the bliss of enlightenment. That will be, the product of all that is your own ultimate well-being by attaining that state of Buddhahood. But along the way, you have happiness in this life, happiness in the next life, happiness of liberation. All the happiness that you seek will come your way when you are focused on others. That's why His Holiness says this is the way to be wisely selfish, is to see that others are the source of your happiness. I explained this last time, that karmically, others become the source of our happiness simply because they are the source through which we are able to practice good karma. Can you practice the karma of generosity without other beings? You could give to yourself, but that seems, pretty silly, right? I'm going to give myself a wonderful gift. Well, yeah, I mean, it's nice to do that every now and then, but if that's the extent of your generosity, come on, you need other people to practice giving, right? So the only way, the karma of giving is that it's through our giving that we actually receive. It's through our giving that we actually have things in our lives. All the resources that every one of you has in your life, from a penny all the way up to whether you own a home or whatever the case might be, all of that has come through the kindness of other sentient beings. Because it's only through your practice of generosity towards them that you've created the causes to have those in your life. So just at the simple level of them being a source of our good actions towards them, that's one way that they contribute to your well-being. Now, you don't do it with that focus. I mean, obviously, that's not the best way to go about being generous either, is I give to others so that I can make sure that I'm going to get things in the future. But rather, we give out of a sincere desire to benefit them and trust that it all takes care. Karma takes care. You will have what you need in your life if you take care of others. And it may not be immediate. You send $500 to somebody and then you go and you look in your mailbox and there's a $500 check for you. That's not quite how karma works all the time. But to have that trust that this is the process that we're engaging in. You can't practice the karma of refraining from killing without other beings. All those mosquitoes in the summer, you can't practice not killing them unless they're there, right? Maybe you're not so good at practicing not killing them yet, but that's the whole point of it, is if you don't have some being there that is bothering you, that's giving you the impetus to try to kill them or wound them or do something mean to them, then you don't have the opportunity to refrain from that killing. It's the same for stealing. It's the same for dividing people with our speech. It's the same for lying. It's the same for all of the non-virtues. We don't have an ability to practice them without other beings. So even at the most basic level of our practice, where we are trying to engage in refraining from negative actions, engaging in positive actions, we need other beings. And that is how we gain temporal happiness. You gain ultimate happiness by making them the object of this mind of bodhicitta. And you need every being to do that. You need every single sentient being without exception as the object of that mind in order for it to be complete, in order for you to have this mind of bodhicitta that aspires to become enlightened for the sake of all beings. So every single being is precious. There was that wonderful bit where Rinpoche was talking about even just one single sentient being is absolutely precious, because it is on the basis of that one being, because they are a part of the collective whole of all beings, that you will become enlightened, that you will actually achieve your greatest welfare. Because like I said, we're by no means we're never divorced from the whole scenario. When we have that mind of bodhicitta, we say, I am dedicated to the welfare of all beings. But in order to do that, I have to become enlightened. Therefore, your own welfare is guaranteed because you will become a Buddha by virtue of that thought. But moreover, you will be able to benefit countless other beings when you attain that state. I'm not going to get into a whole discussion of what Buddhahood entails, but most of you have some background on this. But becoming a Buddha means that you no longer have any obstacles to helping others, especially the knowledge, the ability to know what would be of greatest benefit to others. When you become a Buddha, you have an omniscient mind. And it's very hard for us, I always point out that when I'm teaching to a group like this, I just say what I think needs to be said. I don't have any great wisdom in terms of what people need to hear in the room. But if I were a Buddha, if I were enlightened, then I would know exactly what was going on in everyone's mind and know exactly how to approach them and what to say to them and how to get them to turn their minds bit by bit towards Dharma, towards virtue, towards what is positive, to help them to be happy, to help them to be free from suffering. So we lack that ability right now. And we even lack the skillful means to be able to, manifest in ways to help others to that degree. Buddhists have that ability. We're going to see that kind of coming up in some of these verses from Shantideva, where the bodhisattvas and us in the rooms who are bodhisattva wannabes, who are aspiring bodhisattvas, we try to create these wishes that we could be of whatever use and benefit to others as possible. May we become even the most mundane things for others to help them in their lives, to help them to have some happiness, to help them to have some freedom from fear, from suffering, from pain. So this is the idea behind this first verse, is looking at how others are wish fulfilling for us. Now, last time when we did get together, I went through the remaining verses of the 8 verses. I'm not going to do that again today. You're welcome to insert them here, and I do that as part of my daily practice when I recite this every morning. As I recite the remaining verses, because there's only 7 more. It's not like you're reciting a whole, long text or everything every morning. Those 8 verses are a wonderful thing to memorize and to kind of set yourself up for encountering whatever the day brings you. Because 3 of those verses especially have to do with really difficult situations. Maybe we'll read those. I don't want to, those of you who weren't here at the last class, I don't want you to feel that you're missing out on something wonderful. If we go to the prayer book to page, it's in mine, it's 162. Maybe it's the same in all of these, I'm not sure. Again, we have 2 different versions of the prayer book. But in 162, you should see verses 5, 6, and 7, as well as I think 4 is on mine. But let's read, actually 4 is where we start. 4, 5, and 6. I'm sorry, those are the 3 that we want to recite. So let's recite verse 4 together. Whenever I see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by violent negative actions and suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear, as if I had found a precious treasure. So has anybody been practicing that with He Who Shall Not Be Named this weekend? But I mean, this is a good example, right? Someone who is, wicked in nature sounds really mean to say that about somebody, because again, we wouldn't hold in Buddhism that that's the absolute nature of somebody, that somebody is evil or wicked and they're down to their very core of their being. Because in Buddhism, we trust that there's sort of an inner goodness within all of us. But nonetheless, we see somebody who is habituated to behaving in ways that are not so wholesome, Instead of getting upset and angry at them and putting them down and saying all sorts of mean things about them, how do we use them as a doorway through which we can open up our own hearts to see that it's important for us to have loving kindness and compassion for the worst among us, to really see that they are a real precious treasure for us because they help us to generate those positive thoughts to that degree. It's very easy to have positive thoughts towards people who are really sweet and kind and nice, right? Don't have any problems there. Generate all the loving kindness and compassion for them that you can. But nonetheless, when we encounter those people who are really challenging for us, those are the tests. Those are the people who are important in our lives. So, this is, again, some ideas of how to work with these sorts of verses to say, whenever I encounter that, it doesn't have to be in person. You don't have to meet with them in person. You can look at them on the news and on the internet and wherever it is you're encountering and go, there he is again, my precious treasure. I wish he'd stop appearing so frequently, but but every time you encounter him, there's an opportunity to change your mind, right? Because eventually we have to change our minds so that we are embracing all beings, so that we see all of them as the object of our love and compassion. And if we really think about it, those beings who are most plagued by their own delusions in this way are the ones that we would ideally want to be free from their suffering, right? If they weren't suffering and weren't dealing with all these crazy states of mind, they would be happy, they'd be content, they'd be embracing more positive attitudes towards others, and their actions would follow. So having those thoughts towards others makes complete sense. Having thoughts of anger, disgust, resentment, whatever towards others who are in that state doesn't make sense, because it's not really going to fix anything. It's only going to exacerbate our own suffering and their suffering, because we're unable to help them when we're in that state. And then this goes down even to a micro level when some of us have people in our lives who are like this. Perhaps you had some encounters with those over the holidays, with various gatherings, people who pushed your buttons. It's if they push your buttons, well, it's an opportunity to practice. It's an opportunity to work with that. So they're very precious to us. We want to hold those rare ones dear. It says rare ones. I'm not sure that they're that rare, but I guess it depends on your life, and what kind of karma you have. But they certainly, are to some degree the exception. Because I mean, in the room here, everyone comes in here because we're all with like-minded people who are pursuing the spiritual path. This is kind of a nice, safe place to be. But when we're out there in the world at large, there are chances that we will run into people that will push our buttons in that way. But to see them in this light, this is really important. Let's go on to number 5 there. When out of envy others mistreat me with abuse, insults, and the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others. So this one starts to smart a little bit because we really get invested in being right and being the winner and being the one on top and being the, we want that for ourselves, to always have that because we're so invested in our ego. We were talking about this a little bit yesterday at the practice day that we held here. This self that we rotate from gets really injured at times. Our ego gets bent out of shape by all these various things that happen. When people, whether they're envious or whether they're, whatever their delusions are, when they mistreat us, we're going to see this even playing out in the verses from Master Shantideva that we'll get into perhaps a little bit today, but certainly next week. When people are abusing us, we feel like we have this righteous indignation, like, how dare you do that to me? But at some level, is that really, once more, is that a wise response to that? Is that what is going to change the situation? Now, again, I'm not saying it's good for people to abuse others. That's not the point of this little talk right here. The point is that when that happens to us, it's a learning opportunity. It's something we can actually develop some ability to keep that ego in check, to develop more humility at that time, to be willing to give the victory to others and to accept the defeat. Especially in very trivial things. A lot of our life, we spend caught up in a lot of stuff that really doesn't mean a whole lot in the end. We get so invested in it and argue, all sorts of time just to hold on to some point of view that we have to be the person who's right. Well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So again, this verse is about those situations where we do have people that are even more intimately involved with us, hurling insults, various levels of abuse at us, that we are willing to take that defeat and accept, that, and then offer the victory to them. Now, again, I'm not, when we go through these verses, people are going to, I'm sure, raise some hands and say, well, but I don't think that's really, how is that wise to practice that way? Obviously, we don't want others to keep doing their harmful behavior because it's not good for them to do it either. So when we're talking about very abusive situations, where someone, for example, is dealing with a spouse or partner that is very abusive physically, even verbally, all those various ways that people can do things that harm others, then we want to make sure that that behavior ceases, because it's not good for that person to continue to do that, and it's not good for the person to continue to receive that. But nonetheless, this is about keeping our attitude in check underneath that. Is it possible, even when one's correcting someone else's behavior, to still have a mind of loving kindness and compassion towards them? Absolutely. Instead of anger, instead of resentment, instead of all the things that this verse is targeting us to get rid of, to not have those states of mind. So it's difficult to practice. I'm not saying this is easy stuff. This is, again, university, beyond university, graduate level kind of practice almost. It's, to some degree, to be able to work with these verses and to really change our minds at those times is not something easy to do. But it's very worthwhile, because then we don't get entangled with other people. We don't create a lot of negative karma in our reactions to them. So let's go on to verse 6, which I find to be the most challenging of these, but obviously they're all challenging. When someone whom I have benefited and in whom I have great hopes gives me terrible harm, I shall regard that person as my holy guru. So this is going to the degree where somebody who is, your best buddy, your friend that you've taken care of, somebody who you've greatly invested in, who you think, again, in worldly terms, it's expected that they're going to behave well towards you, right? Because you've taken care of them. You've done all sorts of wonderful things for them. And you think it's expected that they're going to reciprocate with kindness. Well, in this case, they reciprocate with harmfulness. So what do you do in that situation? You go, wow, this is something I can really learn from. Because what is the mindset that is driving your desire to get good behavior from them because you've taken care of them? It's the mind of attachment. It's not a healthy mind. And we should be more than happy to do whatever for other beings, regardless of what they do for us, whether they harm us, whether they take care of us, whether they are neutral to us. Every single being is precious in this way. And so we don't want a mind that gets caught up in that pattern of attachment, needing all of our friends, our loved ones to be really kind and sweet all the time and take care of us. We should be willing to take on that harm, willing to see that as a powerful lesson for us. Because it's not fair to expect that all beings are going to be, sweet and wonderful and kind, even in this category of those whom we've benefited and taken care of ourselves. So these are challenging mindsets to work with. Once more, I was bringing this up primarily so that you might entertain the idea of reading those 8 verses, the full 8 verses, as part of your daily practice. Rinpoche does have these verses from Shantideva that are also lessons along the same lines, and we'll get into those. But any questions on that idea before I continue on to the next verse? And it's a hard one, right? I mean, this isn't something that we can, again, just flip a switch and suddenly we're able to practice this way. This is once more why these are important things to meditate on. If you do have challenging people in your life, bring them into your meditation. I know you think like, oh, my meditation is my time to be all kind of calm and serene and, regroup so that I can deal with my daily life. But they're who you deal with in your daily life. So if you don't spend the time on the cushion, kind of working with them, working with the situations you have with them, reviewing them, seeing what is more helpful, what might be more beneficial to say or do in their presence when they do the things that they habitually do, then nothing's ever going to change. You might begin to change your mind a little bit, but you're still going to do the same things. You're still going to react the same way. You have to find a way to bring them in and entertain different ideas. Well, what is it like to view them in a different way? What is it like to respond to them in a different way? That's what our meditation is when it's most effective, not just calming our mind, not just focusing our mind, but actually using our time that we spend on the cushion as therapy, individual therapy, your self-therapy, kind of actually looking at it and how do you want to be in the world? So let's go on then to the next verse. If there are no other comments or questions, we'll certainly have an opportunity for that later as well. This is from a great master, Aryasura. He's renowned for having written the 50 verses of Guru devotion, but this is from his prayer in 70 stanzas. Let's recite that together. May I become like a wish-granting jewel, fulfilling all the wishes, and like a wish-granting tree, fulfilling all the hopes of transmigratory beings. So it's kind of an interesting flip-flop here now. We were looking at all sentient beings in that first verse as being wish-fulfilling for us. They're like a wish-fulfilling jewel for us. They allow us to achieve everything that we want, so we want to hold them very dear because our ultimate welfare is bound up in them and their presence in this world. But now we want to say, may I become the same for them? May I become wish-fulfilling for them? There's this whole mythology around wish-fulfilling objects in Buddhism. I'm not sure where it all comes from. I've never encountered one of these objects, but we have it in our culture too, like with genies in a bottle and, all these various ways that people talk about, something magical that's going to bring forth whatever you wish for. Well, a wish-fulfilling jewel is apparently this jewel that you can get from the ocean, and you can do various rituals with it and put it on a post on the full moon day of the month, and then whatever you want materially will be yours. You can wish for a Mercedes or whatever you want, and it all appears there. But of course, sometimes they talk about the limitations of these wish-fulfilling objects, whatever they are, is that they really only grant what you can have in this life. They don't give you things beyond that. That's why when we used wish-fulfilling jewel up in the previous verse, we said other beings are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Why? Because we can actually get more from them than a wish-fulfilling jewel, because we can attain liberation and enlightenment and so on. We can have all these amazing qualities on the basis of others. So the idea, and sometimes in some contexts, is that we want to be kind of seeing a wish-fulfilling jewel as somewhat limited. But nonetheless, the idea is becoming like that for others. How do we become wish-fulfilling for others? How do we have those sorts of thoughts every day that, whatever it is that others need, may I become the source of that? Now, again, it doesn't mean that I'm writing checks to everyone that I see, and doling out I'm certainly fine to do that. If you have the resources to do that, by all means, be kind and generous with your resources. It means that I'm going to have this attitude that I'm going to present myself with to whoever I meet, that I see them in that light of somebody who's very dear and precious, and I want to fulfill their wishes in whatever way I can. The ultimate way to fulfill the wishes of others, of course, is to become enlightened for their sake. I mean, that's the big picture in Tibetan Buddhism, right? Is that this is really the way that we are ultimately of greatest benefit to others, and how we can become wish fulfilling is to actually be able to fulfill their ultimate wishes, which is all beings wanting to be completely happy, all beings wanting to be completely free from suffering. How do we fulfill that? By becoming enlightened ourselves. But these sorts of verses, we're going to look at some of them coming up in Shantideva as well, are kind of setting these strong intentions about becoming this. Can you actually become a wish-fulfilling jewel for others? Well, again, does an object like that even exist? I don't know. I mean, I'm not really saying that these are real possibilities, but you want to have this attitude. Rinpoche even wrote this wonderful book, and there are some copies, I think, still in the cabinet there, called Bodhisattva Attitude. And I'm going to quote from this a little bit later, because he does go through, these were teachings he gave in 2009, I think it was, at the very first Light of the Path retreat. A number of people in the room were at those. I think you didn't go to that one. Claire was at that one. Anyone else who was? Wonderful teachings. By the way, Rinpoche's next Light of the Path retreat is coming up in August and September. And it's 4 weeks, but you can go to any part of it. You can go to a weekend, you can go to a week, you can go to 2 weeks, whatever works for you. And it's at the same place they've always been held in North Carolina. And if you haven't had a chance to do one of these retreats, I'd really encourage you to. They're a little challenging at times, but they're amazing, really beautiful experiences. So in these teachings he did in 2009, he went through some of these core practices that became a part of this. This whole thing evolved over many, many years, from sort of over 10 years ago now. But anyway, this process that he was trying to find, the exact way for this practice to be put together for us to use. But he goes into this whole idea of this bodhisattva attitude. It's the attitude we want to live our lives with. That from the moment we get up till the moment we go to bed, and even through our sleep, if we can, have that thought that we want to be a benefit to others. We want to cherish them. We want to hold them most dear. We want to become wish fulfilling for them. So this is just reinforcing that bodhicitta motivation again and again and again. So again, these wish-granting jewels are talked about. Lama Zopa, in his commentary on this, he talks about the wish-granting trees. Apparently in these pure lands, there are wish-granting trees, which are very powerful in granting whatever you wish for. The idea is that we want to be that source of well-being for others. And again, it's not going to look like that necessarily. It's not like I become an actual wish-granting tree and then all these, wonderful gifts are bestowed on all the beings that ask for them. But in the end, the ultimate goal that all beings are seeking, and I would say most beings aren't aware of this. I mean, it's not like if you ask the person on the street, are you seeking, complete freedom from suffering and, the bliss of Buddhahood? Well, they'll say, well, no, not today. I'm really just going to the store. But, they're really, and of course, most beings are caught up in temporal welfare, right? They're caught up in what brings happiness in the moment. But the underwriting motivation beneath all of that is this ultimate welfare. What beings don't really realize at the deepest level is that's what they're seeking, because they wouldn't keep going from one thing to another if they weren't being driven by that fundamental desire to attain real happiness, real peace, to attain complete freedom from suffering. What leads all beings into doing all the various things that they do, even those that are misguided, engaging in negative behavior, thinking that it's going to fulfill their happiness somehow. I mean, that's really misguided versus, just more mundane behavior and what have you. But nonetheless, this is what we want to be for others, is the source of helping them to have their ultimate wishes fulfilled. And their ultimate wishes, again, they might not be completely aware of, but nonetheless, that's the guiding force behind everything that beings do. That is the commonality that we all share, is that we're fundamentally driven by a desire to be happy and to not suffer. And you see that in all forms of life. Even small, microorganisms and what have you, they flee from that which threatens their life and run towards that which will support their life. Because that's the fundamental desire that's driving the whole show. At the deepest level, it's the ultimate welfare of beings that we want to be fulfilling. Fulfill their temporal desires as best as you can, but recognize that that's not the final, word on the whole show, on the whole thing. That's not going to ultimately satisfy. So this whole verse is really, again, perfectly fine just to recite and meditate on briefly, just to have that kind of attitude, to want to become wish fulfilling. And by the way, Rinpoche does say at this point, if you don't have much time, the short way to generate the motivation for the day is to reflect on these two verses, which give very precious advice about how to live your life for others. So he's essentially saying that everything else that we've looked at, that we read through today, if you don't have the time for all of that, say you've got a really busy day, you're running down to Albuquerque to get on a plane or something like that, and you know that you don't have time to recite this whole thing, go to these two verses, because these two verses, the two on the bottom of page 10, are really about how you live your life for others, which is the main importance of this. Remember, the whole title of this thing is The Method to Transform a Suffering Life into Happiness. Our lives that are not always grossly suffering, but we're always dealing with the same kind of factors and problems. We're always under the control of our karma and delusions. These crazy lives that we have, how do we make them into something very meaningful? How do we make them into something that brings ultimate happiness and well-being to ourselves as well as to others? Primarily by cherishing them. There's that wonderful quote from Lama Zopa where he says, the door to happiness opens when one begins to cherish others. And this is really the source of our happiness. And I know it, sometimes when we hear this, we don't get it right away. It takes a while to really get that at a deep level, because we are so habituated to doing the opposite, to thinking that if I tend to myself, if I make sure that number one is managed and I make sure that I've got everything that I need, then everything will be taken care of. Then I'm guaranteed my happiness. But it's the exact opposite. If we are attentive to the needs of others, if we cherish them and hold them most dear, that is how we will actually achieve our happiness and help them to have happiness. I always point out how this idea of being self-centered is a lose-lose situation. We lose in the end, because by being focused on ourselves, we create lots of negative karma and lots of unhealthy thoughts and perpetuate our own delusions, and we don't really do anything meaningful with it. And others lose because we're not attending to them at all. We're not generating any of these thoughts about benefiting them. But it's a win-win if we cherish others. Why? Because others will certainly benefit because you're focused on them, but you will benefit because this is how I pointed out earlier, we create good karma through those sorts of thoughts. When we see that homeless person on the street and we make that conscious choice to go to them and give them some money or food or talk to them, help them in some way, that extension of ourselves to others is a very positive action that you will reap the rewards of, without a doubt. You don't do it again with that motivation. Oh, I really want to make sure I get some good karma going here. You do it because you really genuinely care about others. But slowly, Buddhism's really good on fake it till you make it type of stuff. Do it, whatever the motivation is, even if initially it's quite self-centered. Well, I want to do this so that I have the rewards in the future of that. Well, that's okay, but keep moving in a direction of genuinely cherishing others. I point this out many times, and many of you have met Lama Zopa, but in my experience, Lama Zopa is a being who never cherishes himself, never is self-centered. I mean, it's pretty astounding to be in the presence of somebody who's like that, because he's always other-focused, always thinking about what others need. A lot of people complain because at some of these retreats, Rinpoche might keep you there a bit long in the evening, but why is he doing that? He's not doing that to torture you or something. He's doing that because he cares about everybody there. He wants to make sure that they get it, that they practice it, that they hear what they need to hear. So he's just always focused on others. I've shared this one story before, but when he had the stroke in 2011, they suspended the retreats for a while because of his recovery and that. He was in the hospital, and all he could do is recite prayers for all the other people who were in the hospital and people who had been in the bed before him, all these other, in the various rooms. His heart was always about others. It was never about, oh, me, what's going on with me? And, am I going to recover from this? And blah, 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 blah. I mean, he was laughing the day after he was in the hospital from this stroke. He had video of him and he was laughing. Most of us would be freaking out, right? If we had a stroke, we'd be like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to this and that? And all this concern. And Rinpoche can only think about others at that time. They even told people to stop coming to the hospital and wherever Rinpoche was staying to see him, because as soon as he would show up, then Rinpoche would want to spend time with them and would take away from his recovery time, would take away from what he needed to do in rehabilitation to be able to teach again. So again, he's always focused on others. That's what kind of a nice image of where we want to end up. We're not going to be there immediately just by reciting these verses every day. But if you recite these verses and let them permeate your being throughout the day, Maybe even bring this around with you and occasionally during the day refresh your memory by looking at these and saying, this is how I want to live my life. And don't beat yourself up if you do things that are opposite to this. That's one of the most important things too. We're going to be self-centered. We're going to follow those more habitual minds. But just keep reminding ourselves, this is the direction I want to move in. This is how I want to, what I'm aspiring to. Okay, maybe I've gone blah, blah, blah enough for the morning, but we'll come back and do some more. But let's just take a little break, like 10, 15 minutes. And when we come back, we'll see if there are any questions so far. And then I will continue into Master Shantideva's verses, which are really sweet, very wonderful verses to work with. Okay. So for those online, just again, the story that was, I won't go, I'll just briefly encapsulate, but thank you so much for sharing that from your heart of your own experience as a public defender and needing to step away from it because of the compassion fatigue that you had. And that being, again, a perfectly viable option that is important that people consider. There's a wonderful story. It is just a story. I mean, because I can't imagine this actually happening, but of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, this 1,000-armed Chenrezig, the story of how he became 1,000 arms is that essentially he was an ordinary person like us, and he made this vow to his guru, who was the Buddha Amitabha, that he would liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. No small task. And so he began by trying to go, just like you were talking about, going to like the worst places. He went to the hell realms, these realms where there's unbelievable suffering, and he empties out the hell realms, manages to get all the beings out of there, and he goes off to do something else. And when he turns back to the hell realms, they filled up again. And he's made this commitment to his guru to liberate all beings. And at this point he says, I can't possibly do this. This is too much for me. And he breaks his vow and he shatters into 1,000 pieces. And then his guru, out of his kindness, reassembles him into 1,000 armed Chenrezig. So he's now got all these additional arms to be able to do even more work for beings. There's almost something that is like an inner transformation that happens when we do walk away from something and say, it's too much for me. Even though we're committed, even though we have that dedication and we want to live our lives this way and we want to be cherishing others all the time and we want to be 100% dedicated to their welfare, at times we're going to be like, sorry, can't do it, folks. I've tried and I'm really just exhausted with the whole thing. And there's almost a strength that comes from doing that. And that story exemplifies that marvelously for me. And again, it's something where the guru is involved in those resources that we have in our lives that we can go to and turn to help us, to inspire us, to pick ourselves back up, assemble our 1,000 arms and get back into the game again. But, we do it with, again, that acknowledgement that we're not capable of doing it in our current capacity. So I think thank you for sharing that. That was really nice. Gave a personal dimension to that, I appreciate that. Anyone else, anything to share on this topic or other things we've discussed? Yeah, Israel.
I've been fortunate to be instructed in this recently to quite some extent. And from my Dharma experience, I do recognize it as a teaching. But noticing when I get abused, kind of the body response, literally a stab in the stomach,
right.
Rage,
sure.
all those things that are kind of a natural response to being abused.
Yeah.
And to practice not responding,
right.
and spending enough time for that to sift out of my consciousness has been, it varies by day, but it's so great when it actually does dissolve and I can get back to realizing how much pain that person is in that is creating that.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's where I'm finding the victory.
Wonderful.
To finally get back to that, go, oh my goodness, that person's, they're in hell.
Right, right.
And so they're just
cool. Yeah.
Sharing it with me.
Yeah. What a blessing. What a blessing. No, again, for those online, Israel was sharing his own personal experience about it. And it is hard because there's the physical element that you were talking about when, we do feel that in our bodies, literally the sense of being stabbed or of being, the all the adrenaline going, all of that, that we want to react out of that place. And it's not a good place to react from. And so to take the time to be able to let that dissipate, to let that dissolve. And then, as you said, to arrive at that place where we see that this is a hurt person. There's that phrase, hurt people, hurt people. Nobody's hurting other people because they're perfectly fine. And everything's going well for them, and the world around them. They hurt other people because they're hurt themselves. And if we can get to that place where we see them, then that's giving the victory to others, as you said. That's really what it ultimately will be. Because once more, we're not ever kind of in the business of condoning bad behavior. That's not what Buddhism is all about. Obviously, Buddhism is about trying to encourage good behavior, encourage what is wholesome and good for people to engage in. But when it's coming towards us and we can learn from it, well, then how are we going to best be able to benefit that hurt person? By not getting angry and upset at them and retaliating and all the various things and claiming the victory for ourselves and causing them to experience defeat. That's not going to get us anywhere. I mean, look at the world that we're living in, and there's just that mentality all the time. That's what's going on with this conflict with Iran right now, right? It's like, oh, you do this and then I do that, and then you're going to do this and I'll get the 52 cities that I'll do this, and then it's like that doesn't go anywhere except cause more and more harm and damage and conflict in the world. So it doesn't work. So each of us have to find that individually. And this is really meant to be individual practice. When we see others being abused, well, then by all means, it's our job to stop that abuse. His Holiness makes that very clear in a lot of the things he says about, our approach to social injustice in the world is that we have to be concerned about the welfare. We don't sit there and go, oh, they're experiencing all this abuse. Well, they can take the defeat and give the victory to others. No, that's not what we practice. We practice coming to the aid of those who are in unfortunate situations, who are being, abused by others. Because, and it doesn't mean, again, that we annihilate the other person and think, well, then they'll have the freedom from that because we're getting rid of them. It means you find ways to work with the situation that are wholesome, that are virtuous. And going to those sorts of habitual behaviors is never going to get us the result that we seek. Anyway, this is good stuff. This is what it's all about. Shall we move on? Do a few more verses from... So now we get into these wonderful verses. This is from chapter 3 primarily. There's one verse at the end, which you'll probably recognize from chapter 10. It's one of the really powerful verses that are in this text. Master Shantideva's text, many of you have studied it. Geshe Sherab taught on it on a number of Sundays for various visits from 2014 through, well, I don't know what year. He was teaching on it almost every Sunday. It's a really wonderful text to study. This chapter in particular is after having done the initial introduction to bodhicitta and having done a 7-limb prayer and so on about cultivating bodhicitta in a very profound way. There's all of these sort of aspirational verses that follow. And so each of these verses kind of talk about how to live one's life for the benefit of others, in service of others. And we're going to touch on some of the same ideas we've talked about, but it's a really nice presentation of some of this. Let's read verse 11 first together. For the sake of accomplishing the two purposes of all sentient beings, without any sense of loss or concern, I give away my body and likewise my enjoyments, such as food and clothing, and even all my virtues accumulated over the 3 times. By the way, we'll notice it, and they do have a note that whatever's in italics is more or less stuff that Rinpoche added, embellished the text to some degree. A more literal translation would just be the text that's not italicized. So again, this whole mind of generosity, of giving, it is important that we engage in physical giving where we can. And remember, we're going to go into this in the class that's going to follow. When I finish this text, we're going to do a little class on the 6 perfections. That'll take me up till the end of when I leave and Geshe Sherab returns. There are 3 main ways that we practice generosity. And one of them is material giving. It is important that we do have ways of extending our resources to others who are in need, who actually can benefit from those, who lack those resources. We also have giving protection, helping others to be protected primarily, from danger, fear, what have you, but also, of course, to any way that we can help others to protect their own minds is important. But the main way that we want to be generous to others is through giving of the Dharma, giving of those teachings that will hold others back from their own suffering, help them to not suffer themselves. Now, obviously, we can't do that, any one of those three. I mean, we might have limitations in terms of where the proper place to practice those three. But the most important is that we help others at the deepest level to be able to change their own lives, change their own minds, so that they can be free from suffering by virtue of their own behavior. But this idea of this verse is to practice the intention to give at a very deep level. That is the driving force behind any of those three actions. The intention to give is really what we mean by the practice of generosity. It's kind of interesting when we get into our little discussion on the 6 perfections that will start in a few weeks. All of them are really mental practices. They take physical form in terms of when I actually give money to somebody, but they're mostly about developing an intention to give. And just as in morality, it's primarily the intention to withhold from engaging in non-virtuous behavior, and so on. Each of the perfections are really, they're perfected mentally in terms of what we're doing with our minds. So this little visualization that we're doing with this verse 11, it's actually could be framed in the context of a Tonglen practice. Many of you know this practice, Tonglen. Tong is Tibetan for take or give, and Len is Tibetan for take. It's usually practiced in an opposite way when it's done as a complete meditation. We visualize taking away the suffering of others and giving them our happiness so it can becomes the cause of their ultimate well-being. This could be done in conjunction with this, and even you might pick up a copy of this if you haven't already and read Rinpoche's instructions on doing that, which are right around the beginning of that chapter 5 on Bodhisattva Attitude, how to dedicate your life to others. And this whole verse on giving, he talks about doing it in the context of a full meditation, of taking away the suffering of others, giving them what you have, so it becomes the cause for their happiness. So what we're doing in this verse, what Master Shantideva is saying is, yes, do the physical giving where you can. Give without any sense of loss or concern all your enjoyments, your food, clothing, money, whatever it is that you have. When it says there, I give away my body, well, the really profound practice of giving away your body is probably something you're not ready for yet, which is to actually physically give your body to sustain the life of another being, which is what the Buddha himself did when he was a bodhisattva in training, when as a prince he came upon a tigress who had just given birth to 5 cubs and was starving because of the drought in the area or whatever. And so he gladly gave his body to the tigress so that she could partake of it and feed her cubs and they would all survive. Well, that's pretty profound. That's not something most of us are ready to do right now. If I'm walking up in the woods in Santa Fe and there's a mountain lion with cubs and I'm like, and it's, in the middle of summer and dry and there's no sustenance, I'm not going, oh, wow, my perfect opportunity to practice generosity. I'll freely admit I'm not there yet, And that's okay. I mean, this is really high level giving. They actually say that you break one of your bodhisattva vows if you extend yourself prior to when you're ready to do that. So we have to keep that in mind, that we're not expected to go beyond where we're comfortable going. But don't get too comfortable in one's own little thing, saying, I'm only going to do this type of generosity for the rest of my life and forever. I mean, be willing to push the envelope. So we are talking about acts of generosity to some degree, but we're mostly talking about the mental state of having the intention to give. Thinking that whatever one has, one's own enjoyments, one's merits, one's virtues accumulated over the 3 times, all the positive things that you have kind of in your bank account, you visualize transforming all of that so it becomes everything that other beings need for their temporal well-being, but mostly for their ultimate well-being. That's why if you're doing this meditation on taking and giving, they say it's good to not think about, well, I'm giving, my books and my clothes to others. That's not what I'm visualizing. I'm taking all of that and transforming it. So it becomes this sort of energy that goes out to other beings and it becomes exactly what they need. Because everyone's needs are different, right? And so if others need just a good, healthy meal, well, then it becomes a healthy meal for them. Pema Chodron, in one of her texts, she says, if somebody needs a good cup of coffee, send them a cup of coffee. You don't think about, it becomes whatever is important for them. This is a bit of that wish fulfilling mentality that we talked about just a short while ago, right? You want whatever you give to become wish fulfilling for them. So it becomes a source of their health, their well-being in a very temporal way, but it also becomes Dharma materials, it becomes teachers, it becomes everything that supports them in their spiritual development. But this is a very powerful verse because it begins with this whole idea of how we want to go about dealing with the things that we have in our lives. And you can do this throughout your day. When you're sitting down and enjoying your nice cup of coffee or your, dessert or whatever it is, it's an enjoyable thing in your life. Think about giving that to others. You'll get the pleasure from it. You still, you're not going to give away that pleasure completely because you're still going to partake of it and enjoy it. But think about others at that time. That's a Bodhisattva attitude. Rather than only getting caught up in me and my little experience of this delightful, delicious thing, right? Then it only influences our own attachment. It only makes our attachment stronger. If we think about giving it away to others, then we're a lot freer about it. Still enjoy it, but give it away. So this verse is a very powerful place to start because it begins with this idea of trying to do this for the sake, I'm kind of skipped over the first line, for the sake of accomplishing the two purposes of all sentient beings. The two purposes, we can say there's self-welfare and other welfare. Those are what bodhicitta is all about, right? I'm going to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. I'm going to achieve my greatest potential so I can help others to achieve theirs. So there's always these kind of two purposes involved, which are the complete purification of one's own mind and the development of, that state of Buddhahood within oneself, so that I can then be imbued with all the qualities to be able to help me benefit others, for me to be fully dedicated to the welfare of other beings. All the compassion, all of the things that I need that will help me to enact the welfare of others. So the two purposes are embodied in those two, to completely remove and purify all the obscurations that we have, and then to complete all of their realizations, to complete everything that they need so that they can actually attain the same state that we are striving to. So we do all of our actions. This is Shantideva, once more, he's in the text, as I mentioned, he's just gone through a whole introduction to bodhicitta and how to make the bodhicitta motivation very firm in one's mind through taking the bodhisattva vows and so on. Well, then this is how you practice. This is how you live your life for others, is that you think that in order to accomplish this, in order for me to be of greatest benefit to others, I'm going to practice this mentality of giving. I'm going to practice physical giving where I can. I'm going to practice giving protection and dharma where I can. Do you have a question? I wasn't sure. No, okay. Or a comment. Any comments or questions on that verse? I don't know if there's much more to say about it. If you aren't familiar with Tonglen, I would really encourage you to go to Rinpoche's text, where it's pages 98 through about 100, 101 even. He goes into really extensive, very huge meditations on taking and giving Tonglen, but start where it's comfortable for you. They do often encourage that, even just back to this whole idea of taking care of ourselves and how important that is. You can begin Tonglen with yourself. See yourself as a suffering sentient being, your own current situation or future situation, even past situation to some degree, if you want to work with that, and hold yourself through that lens of wanting yourself not to suffer, wanting yourself to have happiness, and practice in that very safe environment of just the container of you and your own self as the object of that meditation, and then begin to extend it. And extend it to others who are very close to you first, because it's very easy to have this mind towards others who we already have some compassion and love for, but then eventually extend it out to other beings. And Rinpoche, of course, goes to this degree of, giving to hell beings, giving to the hungry ghosts, giving to all the animals, giving to all the gods, all the demigods. I mean, just these huge, huge meditations. One thing I will share from what he shares in that this text, Bodhisattva Attitude, it's on page 99 at the bottom. And he says, my root guru, His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche, used to say that you cannot give your body to sentient beings in its ordinary form. Obviously, if you're physically giving it, but this is a visualization of it. You shouldn't visualize that I'm sending out my body and it becomes what for, the people are receiving my body. I don't know, it's a little strange. He says, you should visualize your body as a wish-granting jewel and offer it like that, thinking they receive everything they want from it. So he says, visualize your body in that way. And he says, I think the idea is that sentient beings can receive everything they want from a wish-granting jewel. So, if you send out that your body as a wish granting jewel to others, then it immediately becomes the source for whatever it is that beings need. It's just another play on this. By the way, with Tonglen, you have complete literary license to do whatever you want. You can visualize, light, you can visualize, sending things out in a variety of ways. Do what's creative for you, what really works for you. I haven't talked so much about the taking side of it, but again, go to Rinpoche's text and I'm sure it'll help you on that side of it. It's not mentioned in the verse, but it does make some sense to kind of have that willingness to take away the suffering of others. And there are lots of different visualizations to do with that as well. But the idea is what we're targeting in this whole meditation and in all of this that we're looking at around these verses from Shantideva is the tendency we have to be focused on ourselves alone, to the exclusion of others. This is the mind that we often call self-cherishing, but a better way might be to call it self-centeredness or this self-preoccupation. I mean, this is the tendency we have throughout our day to really think once more of me, myself, and I, and what is it that I need for my welfare, for my well-being. And it causes us to frequently neglect the needs of others, to not think about them. I mean, certainly we can say that the self-cherishing mind has been what's caused the global problems that we have in terms of, pollution and the change in the environment and all of this, because people aren't thinking about the effects that their actions have on others. Because we're getting everyone's very selfish and thinking that if I have what I need, well, then I'm taking care of myself. What business is it for anyone else? But the things we do affect others, without a doubt. So the mind of self-cherishing, Buddha says, is behind all of our suffering. At some level, all the negative karma we create is because we think of ourselves first. We don't think of others. We take what we want and don't think about the others who we take from. We're doing these behaviors that are not really, again, very attentive to the needs of other beings at all. So if we reverse that attitude, which is what these verses are helping us to do, and Tonglen in particular is a very powerful way of doing it, then we will start aligning ourselves with what are the true causes of happiness for both ourselves and others. So taking and giving, I think it's Pema Chodron in her book, the first book that she wrote, Wisdom of No Escape, she wrote about Tonglen in there, and she says, this is the reverse attitude to what we would generally do. We would generally want to take what is good for ourselves and give away all the lousy parts, all the suffering, all the stuff that causes us misery. But this is the exact opposite. I'm going to take on all that miserable stuff. I'm going to take on all that suffering, and I'm going to give away what I have so that others can be happy. Not keep it for myself and my own happiness, gladly give it to others. And this is all done on the cushion. It should influence our behavior when we're off the cushion, but it's really a mental exercise in how do we reverse that habitual pattern of cherishing ourselves and neglecting others. Instead, we want to cherish others and in a sense neglect ourselves. But as His Holiness pointed out earlier, you're not neglected in the whole scenario because this is how you're actually wisely selfish. You will get taken care of. Your needs will be met without a doubt karmically if you tend to the needs of others. So the taking can be done in a variety of ways. Again, you can visualize taking all their suffering in the form of a black smoke that's sometimes encouraged. I described this to one person when I was first starting out on my Buddhist path, and they said, that sounds really disgusting. And that's kind of the point of it. It's not supposed to sound pleasant because you're taking on the suffering of others. It's a visualization, but you should really feel like, I was one time when I was a small electrical fire at our house, and I was like, oh, that's what it's supposed to be like. When you feel like electrical smoke, it's like, it's really awful. It's like, you should feel like you're almost going to gag on this stuff. You're taking it in with the willingness to say, I don't want that being to suffer. I would rather take that suffering on myself. And I always point out how, no doubt, most of us in the room have some experience of this with a pet or a child or a parent or somebody in our lives who we sat at their bedside when they were very sick. And we had that thought, oh, I wish I could take that sickness away from them, that fever, that horrible pain, whatever it is that they're experiencing. We do have that ability to have that kind of thought. Here we're just trying to enlarge on that, to be willing to take on whatever suffering we see, breathe that in, be willing to experience that, and have it become a way to get rid of that self-cherishing mind, a way to annihilate that self-cherishing mind. If we go back to the prayer book, the verses that we were reading from earlier than the 8 verses, the subtitle of this practice on page 157 is called Ever-Flowing Nectar of Bodhicitta, Annihilating the Demon of the Self-Cherishing Mind. We're trying to get rid of this demon This is what's been the source of so much of our suffering, all of our problems, is that we have this tendency to be focused on ourselves and hold ourselves supreme and neglect the welfare of others. So these verses that we went through, the 8 verses the last time and the ones that we touched on here, the verses from Master Shantideva, they're all about reversing that attitude. Saying, I need to get rid of this mind because it's the source of all my own pain and suffering and causes me to inflict pain and suffering on other beings, or by my neglect of them, to have them experience more suffering. So this is a really powerful place to start with Master Shantideva's verses here, is to show that we, want to have that mentality of being a benefit to others, giving to them whatever will help them temporally, ultimately. Then there's a little quote that Rinpoche puts in here. This is from one of his teachings between this and the next verse. It says, by abandoning attachment and giving everything away, I will attain the state beyond sorrow. Since sentient beings are the supreme field of generosity, I will give everything to them. So this encapsulates what this next verse is. Let's go ahead and read verse 12 together. By abandoning attachment and giving everything away, I will pass beyond sorrow, and my mind will achieve the non-abiding, sorrowless state, the state of omniscience. Since I will have to give up everything all at once when I die, it's best for me to give it away to sentient beings, because Buddhahood is attained in that way. So the first part of it is at the essence of what Rinpoche's quote was this idea that if we are able to transcend our own attachment to what we have in our lives and be freely giving of whatever it is that we have, then this will become the cause for actually attaining this. It's described here as the sorrowless state, but you'll notice in italics, the word non-abiding has been put in there. That's because we're not just talking about the ordinary state of nirvana. Remember when we went through the stages of the path, the second level of the stages of the path is where one does generate that motivation to attain one's own individual liberation, one's own nirvana, that is an end of your cycling from existence to existence. But then we went to the great scope, the third level. We saw that this is a very, short-sighted and selfish motivation at some level. It's only looking at me and me extracting myself from samsara. Rather, I should want to attain a greater state, the state of Buddhahood. The state of Buddhahood is sometimes called non-abiding nirvana. Why? Because nirvana that we normally experience, or that a practitioner would experience on the basis of the individual path, is where you kind of abide in that state of peace. You check out of samsara and you just hang out with a completely pacified mind. I don't know what this must be, pretty amazing, but nonetheless, it's totally removed from the world at large. You're no longer involved in samsara, but you no longer have any desire to help any of the beings in samsara either. So you want to attain a nirvana where you're not going to abide in that state. You're also, of course, not going to be caught up in samsara any longer because you've transcended that, but you're going to actually stay active in the world, involved in the world. Buddhas don't just sit up in Buddhaville with all the other Buddhas at the Buddha bar. They are actively involved in the world. That's the whole mission of becoming a Buddha, so that you can become the instrument of helping all other sentient beings. So in order to do that, you have to get this motivation to go beyond that, and you have to practice the things that will lead to the attainment of that, which are the 6 perfections. This is speaking to the perfection of generosity here, that we want to practice our generosity with that motivation of bodhicitta, with our desire to become enlightened, to accomplish the 2 purposes of all beings, as we saw in the earlier verse. So we're going to practice giving away all that we have, so we can attain this state that is not just our own nirvana, but the state of non-abiding nirvana, the state of Buddhahood, the state of omniscience, as it's mentioned there. And then this last 2 lines are actually quite interesting, because, of course, this is a nice little meditation to do. Everything that we have, you're going to have to leave every single thing that you own at death, right? You can't take anything with you, right? That's the old phrase. You can't take it with you. You can't even take a penny with you. I mean, so forget about whatever else it is that's worth more than a penny. All of your possessions, and if you've ever had to deal with somebody passing away and dealing with all their possessions, you know how messy it can be. I mean, do a gift for those people by not having so many possessions that you leave behind that they're going to have to contend with. But the point here is that while you have those things, make them useful. Because when you die, they're no longer yours. They're gone. They're out of your sphere of experience. You're on to something else. Your consciousness is going on to the next existence. All those material possessions could have been used wisely, and they weren't used at all. So he's giving us this admonition here, since I'll have to give up everything all at once when I die, without a doubt, everything's gone. They say the consciousness leaves the body like a hair pulled out of butter. It's just like there's nothing else on it. It just smoothly goes out, and that's it. Consciousness is on its way. Everything else is left behind. The butter is, all of the other stuff that we've had in our lives, right? So he says it's best for me to give it away to sentient beings because Buddhahood is attained in that way. Well, make good use of the resources that you have to benefit others. And even once more, if you're saying, well, but I like to listen to my music and I like to, eat my delicious things, do it with a mind of bodhicitta. Do it with the first verse in mind, giving that pleasure away, giving it, having that meditation while you partake of those things. But by all means, the admonition here is really to make sure that we don't neglect that aspect of our existence, that we do have physical things. Now, Master Shantideva, when he wrote this in an earlier part where he was doing the offering limb in the 7-limb practice, he says, he doesn't have much to offer. Well, obviously, somebody who's taken the vows of a monk or a nun and is trying to live a more austere life and not collecting a lot of things and filling their home with all sorts of beautiful stuff, they don't have all those things. So if that's your situation, that you don't have a lot of things in your life, it doesn't mean you can't give anymore. It means you can still give by imagination. You can still give certainly by looking at all the beautiful resources that are shared in this world, that we can have positive thoughts around giving to others. There's lots of ways to practice generosity. It isn't contingent upon us having things, because once more, we're talking about the intention to give, the mind that wants to give, which is what we're trying to increase in this verse and in the practice of generosity. And I'll go into this in a lot more detail when we get to the first perfection in that class that follows from here. It's almost noon, so I maybe stop here and see if there's 1 or 2 questions or comments that people want to make. Yeah, Paula.
Well, I just have kind of a fun little note on your self-cherishing. It's not in the Buddhist tradition, but it was called the unholy trio. And basically me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny.
That's a good one. Yeah, I like that one. So the unholy trio of me, myself, and I.
Unholy Trinity.
Trinity, yeah. Unholy Trinity, yeah. That's a good one. Hang out with them way too much. Good, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else, anything came up today? So as usual, my encouragement is to, let me finish my thought, then I'll come back to you, Tony. I encourage you to work with this practice. As I said, take it with you. It's your copy. You can do with it as you wish. But it's nice to start your day with this. And if you don't want to go through all the things we haven't done, there's this wonderful little practice that we'll get to in the last few classes on this, where we bless the speech and do these mantras. Maybe that's too much for some of you in the room right now. That's okay. But even just to recite these verses up through page 14, because even though I'm giving commentary on these verses, many of them are pretty explicit in terms of what they're saying, the types of practices that we're trying to engage in. But try to start your day that way. And really have that be your intention. Let that guide you through your day so that you're always going back to, is what I'm doing benefiting others? Is what I'm doing focused on the welfare of other beings? Because if we start having that mindfulness of that type of thought, I think a lot of the things that we do with our lives will fall by the wayside, because we'll recognize that it's not really benefiting others. I'm not saying, again, we don't take care of ourselves at all, because we discussed that earlier. You can take care of yourself within the context of needing to do that to replenish your ego. I even talked about as one of the important aspects of the 4th perfection of joyous enthusiasm and energy that we put into our practice. One of the powers we have to have is the ability to relinquish the tasks at times when we need to recharge the batteries, when we need to do what needs to be done to be in a better place to serve others. But we then roll up our sleeves and we get back to work when we've done that. So you can do these things within that context. But if you keep asking yourself throughout your day, is what I'm doing benefiting others? And you might still do what you're doing, but you've changed your thought. And it's really mostly about the thoughts. The behavior follows from the thoughts. But if we change our thoughts in terms of how we are eating our breakfast or how we are doing whatever, these wonderful practices that I didn't touch on today, but we'll get into, that Rinpoche advises, then everything becomes virtuous. Then your whole life becomes meaningful. This title of this text, transforming a suffering life into happiness, becomes reality. That your life becomes a great source of happiness for yourself and others. Shall we do a few prayers to conclude? Thank you all for all these questions and comments and sharing. I really do appreciate it. Makes the classes so much richer, I think, for everyone involved when people are willing to share. So please feel free all the time to do that. I have no objection to that at all. So page 235, we're going to do the first two prayers there as we usually do. We don't usually do these. 246. Thank you, Charlene. When I go away for a couple weeks, and I always have to be reminded about what we do. 246 is where we are reciting once more. These are verses from the latter chapter, chapter 10 of Master Shantideva's text. And before we recite this, we might bring to mind those beings who we are specifically dedicating for. This prayer is very encompassing of all beings. But each of us has beings that we're holding in our hearts right now, beings who are experiencing obstacles to their well-being, beings who have illness, who have died, or who are dying. We can even think about parts of the world where there's great strife, great suffering, such as what's going on in Australia with the fires there, all the beings that are being impacted by that, and also the great impact on this world that these fires are having. And then also thinking about Iran and Iraq, the places where these great tensions are right now, that whatever it is, again, places in the world or people in the world that we're moved by, try to hold them in mind while we recite these verses. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Turn back one page, and on the right-hand side will be the paperclip copy of the prayer for His Holiness. And this is the one we're doing now, and then we'll go to the other side, the bottom of page 244 for the prayer for Lama Zopa. And as we recite these prayers for these two precious teachers, by extension, we're making prayers for all the spiritual guides in this life, in this world, to continue to abide, to have good health and long lives, and for us and others to always have perfect guides in all our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. So thank you all so much for your patience and being here today. Gone a little bit over time. I apologize for that. And thank you all those who were online today.